Welcome, everyone. We're right at noon, and so let's get started. Our session is being recorded today. I'm Dr. Peggy Symingson, Interim Director of the Center for Research on Teaching and Learning Excellence at the University of Texas at Arlington. I am joined today by the CRTLE team, Nikisha Brown, Beth Fleener, and Sarah Shelton. And we are also joined today by our two guests from Adobe. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sarah Shelton, our Assistant Director at CRTLE, and she's going to tell you a bit about our session, and then we'll turn it over to our key speaker from Adobe.
Yes, so we're joined today by Steve and also by Todd Taylor, who is going to be leading our session today, going over several of the Adobe products we have here at UTA that faculty and students can use. You see on the screen right now a link and QR code for Todd's presentation he's going to be showing us on screen, and I'll also drop that link in the chat so y'all have access to that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Todd and let him tell you a little bit more about himself and what we're going to be doing today.
Great. Todd, before you share, if everyone in the chat could just say, like, if you're a student, staff, faculty, we can get a sense of who's joining us today.
Yeah, and also if you include the unit or the discipline that you're associated with, that'd be real helpful. Stephen, why don't you say a quick hello before I take over the airwaves?
Sure. So I'm the Senior Customer Success Manager at Adobe for University of Texas at Arlington. I cover several campuses in North America that have committed to a creative campus vision with Adobe. And so that's kind of a digital literacy learning experience throughout curriculum. And we're excited to have Todd share with you some things about Express and Firefly and how you can help your students learn in a multimodal learning way.
Great. I'll introduce myself. My name is Todd Taylor, and my business card for Adobe has the unique title of Pedagogical Evangelist. I'm also still technically an English professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I directed the first year writing program for over 10 years. And where I joined the faculty in 1997, I still live in Chapel Hill. So I'm on the East Coast. Thank you to CRTLE for having me and us in hosting this conversation. It's always good to be working with pedagogical evangelists, even by a different name. And so anyone I know that directs a writing program or works in a center for teaching and learning is talking about and thinking about the same things that bring us together today. And so I like to begin sort of every conversation that I have when discussing instructional technology with focusing on what I think is most important. And so I'd like everyone to put a brief word or phrase in the chat pod that represents an aspiration. And let me define what I mean by that in just a second. An aspiration they have for a specific course or a specific program in terms of innovation, in terms of responding to some really pressing issues of our time in higher education. And when I say aspiration, I don't mean, students would better learn how to use the quadratic formula or whatever it might be, but something higher level. And I'll give you an example of an aspiration of mine that I've had ever since I can think about in 30 years of university teaching, which is I've always aspired for students to better connect what they're doing in my courses with the world around them and the future ahead of them. It's always been very important to me that they feel connection and application to what we're doing in my courses. So I'm sure there's going to be a host and an array of different kinds of aspirations. But if everyone would just put not a sentence, but just a phrase or a couple words to focus on things that you really like to do better, either with the faculty you're working with or with the classes you're actually teaching yourself. And for back to school in 2025, not something that, maybe we'll have to wait 5 years to get a grant to come through or something like that, but something, you could really potentially have an impact and accomplish in the fall term 2025. So if you'd please just put some of those aspirations in there, we can kind of see where everyone's coming from. And I'll give you a second to do that. And so Sarah says a mental shift from product to process. It's interesting. That's been a conversation in the teaching and writing for decades. And it's actually becoming even more prominent now as generative AI has changed the landscape of higher education assessment. Thinking that the sometimes overemphasis on the finished product only, atomistically and without relationship to the processes and the metacognitive moves that students are making to get to that product, sort of encourages students to maybe take shortcuts. But most educators that I know are thinking about, I want students to go through many deeply cognitive and metacognitive processes, critical thinking, analysis, study, reflection. And so that needs to be more a part of the design of what students are doing, to think about how we can get them to think deliberately and explicitly about the processes they're going through, and then reflect back on the choices they make afterward. Student engagement and collaboration and discussion. We were partners on a series of things with the Chronicle of Higher Education, and I'm now going to forget what year it was, but it was the April, I think, 22 or maybe it was 21 edition of the Chronicle of Higher Education reported that student engagement had hit to all-time highs and a crisis level, and that many campuses are figuring out and how to respond to that change in terms of student engagement. Very often, we think about trying to connect with students who aren't just maybe emotionally disengaged, but because of the circumstances of their lives are materially disengaged through the digital divide or through the demand of their lives and having to have jobs and families and whatever might not make it difficult for a non-traditional student to access and get the most out of education. So I always start every conversation I've had over 30 years on instructional technology, not focusing on the technology itself, but what is it you want to do different or do better? Because the technology is, as an end, isn't an end in itself. That isn't why we're here today. We aren't here today to figure out how to use Adobe better. We're here to use the very powerful and increasingly easy to use platform of Adobe Express to achieve exactly these kinds of aspirations. And so, everyone's going to have a different focal point, but the idea is that uh, that um, that these modalities and these approaches to student learning have the potential to achieve all kinds of aspirations, from engagement to retention to skills development to all kinds of things that I think increasingly we're all sharing in responsibility for. In the chat pod, they have put a link for how you can get access to your Adobe license. All faculty and staff, I believe, at University of Texas Arlington have access to the entire Adobe Creative Cloud, which means all of these applications, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, After Effects, professional grade applications that are incredibly powerful and versatile, that have no limitation, but can have a very steep learning curve. And so what we're going to focus on today is not Photoshop or Illustrator or Premiere Pro, but a relatively new application called Adobe Express, which is light and accessible. It's web-based. So any student, any instructor, anywhere on any device, mobile, tablet, laptop, Chromebook, doesn't matter, can do some really powerful things in a matter of seconds, in a matter of one or two clicks with the emerging Adobe Express platform. Adobe Express was completely re-engineered 2 years ago, and it is developing like wildfire in the sense that, like, Stephen Watson and I can't keep up with all of the new developments in Express every day. But what this session is intended to do is for me to give my best advice to you on easy ways to start. I raise a hand or wave, my internet just said it stopped. So
You're back now.
I'm back now. Okay, good. Sorry. Thank you. So Adobe Express and Firefly together are this sort of perfect combination that basically now enable anyone to bring to light any vision they have for what they want to say and express and communicate. All right. And so that's what we're here today to do. I'm also going to give you a leave behind to share sort of the state of the art of what's possible. This is the URL. This is the resource that I'm going to leave behind that will have additional links to it. And as I say here, the purpose of this session is to first establish why what I call authentic assessment can be a uniquely effective approach to learning, and then demonstrate how Adobe Express with Firefly can make that easy to do so, especially for instructors who might be new to such approaches, both pedagogically and technologically. So we're going to begin with this conversation and some examples, but then I'm going to give you a demonstration of the sort of state of the art and a very practical, easy to use collection of starter kits that are appropriate to learning and teaching with Adobe Express in any discipline. If you haven't seen Adobe Express, this is what it is. I'm not going to really do much of a tour of this interface. There's other resources for doing that. Well, what I'm going to do is give you the quickest way to get started through some shortcuts, and then everything you need to know as an instructor to be able to enable that and hand that to your class. There we go. But let me just describe it this way. If you haven't had any experience with Adobe Express with Firefly is currently the most affordable, scalable, easy to use, and responsible way to enable authentic multimodal assessment across the entire college curriculum. UTA has just begun its journey as an Adobe Creative Campus, so the investment has already been made. There's no more money to spend, and this means that it's going to be around as an enterprise solution for many years. So you don't have to worry if all of a sudden this is going to disappear, come January or come even a year from now. I'm going to begin a little bit of inductively here, specifically talking about what we have in mind when we say authentic assessment or high impact practices. This is a good friend of mine. His name is Professor Jack Manel. He is a professor of criminal justice studies at Winston-Salem State University, which is 50 miles down the road right behind me. And Winston-Salem State University was the first HBCU to become a designated Adobe Creative Campus. I'm proud to say we now have 8 HBCUs that are Adobe Creative Campuses. And his example to me is sort of the epitome of what we're after in conversations like these, and what we're after when trying to leverage a platform like Adobe. And in Jack Manel's classes, in order for students to better understand and then do something with their study of criminal justice systems, Jack has students create social media campaigns using Adobe Express to raise awareness about North Carolinians who've been wrongly incarcerated. So imagine being a part of Jack Manel's class and participating in something like that. Well, I have a PhD in English, and as an undergraduate, I wrote papers on Eudora Welty and Ralph Ellison and William Faulkner, but I can't tell you a single paper that I wrote as an undergraduate. I don't remember any of them. Imagine being in Jack Manel's class and creating a social media campaign that raised awareness about people who've been wrongly incarcerated, that resulted in some way in those folks being released from prison. You're never going to forget that. You're never gonna unlive the lessons that you learned in that kind of experience. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about leveraging these technologies to have those kinds of high impact practices. And those kinds of high impact practices go by many different names. I've called them many different things over the years: experiential learning, active learning, project-based learning. Doesn't matter exactly the name you put to it. It's what it's about that's important. My current favorite term is authentic assessment. and not just authentic assessment in general, but enabling authentic assessment using emerging technologies. Because in some ways, emerging technologies have gotten us into a position where authentic assessment may be more important than ever, because one of the reasons that students shortcut assignments and projects, and especially writing papers, can often be because they aren't really being asked to engage. They're not really being invited to share their thoughts. They're only just being, asked in a college project to just prove that they read something or prove that they paid attention to a lecture in the way that they're asked to put together a project. So an authentic assessment has manifold benefits. It can improve content attainment and retention. As authentic assessment is categorically focused not just on pleasing a teacher or demonstrating consumption, but the actual development of transferable skills. It can increase student engagement. It can enable universal learning design. And if you're not unfamiliar with that term and that concept, what it means is that people learn in different ways. We're not just talking about sort of physical access, but also cognitive and actually sort of ideological access to learning opportunities that aren't so narrowly defined as only one way to demonstrate or motivate or capture or engage learning. So, for example, the principle of learning design is that in order to assess or to actually even motivate learning, it isn't only a high stakes exam, or it isn't only a research paper. Students could be making a podcast or a video or a website or an infographic or a research poster as a way to not just demonstrate learning, but to motivate it and encapsulate it itself. That's the idea behind universal design learning, not being so rigid in the ways and the opportunities for which students can learn. One of the things I think is so important to authentic assessment is that exactly what we saw in the chat pod, I think it was from Sarah, who said that she wanted to move students away from being consumers of other people's content toward them becoming producers of their own ideas. And that to me is very much definitional about that authentic assessment. We want to cultivate agency and self-efficacy, so students are taking ownership of their own program of study and their own journey through your degree programs, so that when they leave your campus and go into other opportunities, they have more self-efficacy, they have more control and insight and thought about defining their paths as lifelong learners. And then lastly, a sort of very practical way to think about this is that authentic assessment encourages students to create something worth putting on a resume. Students ask me, how do I get an A in this class? I said, well, when you get to the point that you're working on a project that you're not even thinking is being meant for me to look at, you're trying to put together something that's meant to circulate, that's meant to reach other audiences or other people. And I say, when you get to the point that you've made something you're so proud of in this class, that you want to share it with friends and family or people you work with, you earned an A a long time ago. And so sort of summarize the common elements of what those high impact practices in authentic assessment look like, regardless of their preferred names. To me, they have three essential components. Authentic assessment is applied. It's meant to connect student work directly to the world around them and the future ahead of them. It's meant to develop transferable skills. Authentic assessment is active. It moves students away from being passive, isolated consumers to becoming active producers. And authentic assessment is transdisciplinary. It is unconstrained by rigid academic genres, boundaries, and modalities. Now, that doesn't mean that in a course on health sciences that we aren't focused very much on making sure that students understand what that discipline is about and how knowledge is made and the content that they need to know in that discipline. It's just that the way that they perform or experience learning about those methods and disciplines and content isn't constrained by a single modality or a single approach. It's more universal, right? And so that is something I think many educators believe in. The problem tends to be how to do that at scale, and then how to do that when you maybe didn't have those kinds of experiences very often as a student yourself. And then how can we support people, instructors and faculty who are want to innovate, who want to try something they've seen elsewhere, and they want to try it themselves for the first time. And the idea here is that, this I like to show as another sort of inductive example of this. This is a portfolio from a former student of mine. Her name is Valentina Arizmendi. She graduated in June of 21. Seems like it was just yesterday. Now it's 4 years ago. And this is the portfolio that she started in my first year English class. In my first year English class, every student tells a story of community or social justice or a professional profile in 6 modalities in 15 weeks. So everyone picks a story that they want to research and share. And it begins by using their smartphone and taking pictures to create a purely visual narrative for the story they want to tell. In this case, Valentina was at the time an entrepreneurship, wanted to be an entrepreneurship and business major. And so she found someone, this local entrepreneur who had saved a historic theater from a wrecking ball and turned it into something much more than just a theater. It turned it into a community center. And so she thought she was engaged by that story. It begins by the student taking pictures with their smartphone to create a purely visual version of the story, like these photos that she took that you're seeing here. Then in the second part of the course, they create a magazine article that combines a visual narrative with a textual narrative. Then they create a documentary film version of the same story. Then they create a podcast version of the same story. Then they create a website which collects all these pieces together, and then ultimately offers a mobile app version of the same story. And you just heard me right. In a first year English class with no experience whatsoever doing any of this kind of digital content creation, students are prototyping mobile apps. And the result of that, in Valentina's words, were it gave her the confidence to then experiment with these modalities everywhere across the curriculum, in science classes, in social science classes, in humanities classes, in ultimately her journalism classes. So that when she graduates, she has developed her own story in her own words. It tells a story of who she is and what she can do. And that's exactly what I mean when I'm talking about self-efficacy and agency. And so when students are given these kinds of opportunities to put their evidence-based, research-based, very academic and very pre-professional work into circulation, into the world that's meant to be seen, that's a very different pedagogical dynamic than writing a research paper for a professor and it's only going to be seen by that one person. And so the result of this is that, and these are Valentina's words, of course the diploma meant something to me and I have a transcript, but when people want to, know about who I am and what I accomplished as an undergraduate, this is the closest representation I have to that. And she says that when I started doing this kind of work, I had no idea where this portfolio was going to lead to. But you know what? In my sophomore year, I connected one dot to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, until by the time she got to her, her summer internship between her junior and senior year, she had this narrative and this understanding of who she is and what she can do as a result of the metacognitive reflection on all of these projects. And so that's why, the idea of putting something on a resume enables all these kinds of higher order thinking skills. And I think, as I started to say a minute ago, who in the world doesn't want this for their students, right? The question with this kind of assessment is how do you have the time, the space, and the support to innovate this and do this when you've never had the experience before? Because if any of you out there, I'm sorry you can't, well, I don't know if you can raise hands or give a thumbs up. I don't know if you've ever opened Photoshop. That is a very intimidating experience at first, but it's a completely different day thanks to Adobe Express. And so here's the leap behind that any of you listening out there can begin running with, not after another webinar, not after a weekend at Bernie's, but after minutes. We have worked with a lot of educators like yourself and instructional designers and online teaching programs and writing program administrators, and we've focused in on this sort of package of open resources that anyone could use in combination with Adobe Express to get started fast. And so here are sort of the greatest hits of academic work: research posters, portfolios, infographics, presentations, videos, and podcasts. And as you can see, this is the same thing that we did in the class that Valentina took in fall of 2017. But in fall of 2017, when Valentina did this, she had to learn Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign and Premiere Pro, and that's a heavy lift. The idea here is that if we want to do this at scale, and we want to make this accessible to every student and every instructor, we have found ways to flatten this learning curve to nothing. And here's how quick it can be. Let's say you're out there interested in infographics, and all you have to do is click on this one template. And if you have your Adobe Express account all set up, you go directly into Adobe Express. And from here, you can, it's loading slowly. You have what's known as a remixable template that has built-in instructional material. So there are 3 slides in this template. This is the first, this is the second, this is the third. And what this template does is it gives you fundamental instructions on designing an infographic. Establish a clear purpose and focus. Have a clean design that maximizes visuals. Tell an organized sequential story. Engage, be sure you have engaging info and data. And then it gives specific instructions on how you do this in Express. And then you go to this second slide and you can open it up and edit all of these pieces and then export this as your own infographic. And then there is a model of this infographic actually completed. So anyone can compare like an ultimate version of remixing this template. This is all generic and this just has placeholder text in numbers. But here it gives you an example of what it looks like when it's complete, so you can kind of learn from that model. And the idea then is that this is the simplest, most direct way that we can think of that the faculty we've been and instructional designers we've been working with have thought of as how to get started quickly. And so here's an example of a portfolio. So here's the template. You click the template here, and it's going to take a second to load. There'll be a button right here that says remix this. When you click remix this, now the student is downloading, is downloading their own clone of that template. So now it exists in their Adobe Express account, and it's not changing anything with the original template. And it isn't just like a form that's filled in. It's meant to have instructional content here. It's designed in a certain way. So obviously, if this were my portfolio, I'd put in my first name and last name, and I would say, I am an Adobe Pedagogical Evangelist. I would click here. I would replace this placeholder image with my headshot. And what we're encouraging everyone to do is to start telling a story about themselves. And it isn't just filling in a form. It is what kind of worker, what kind of person are you? And then it isn't just, filling in a list laundry list of experiences and credentials because you already have a PDF resume for that. This is something that amplifies that. It tells a more three-dimensional story. And the way this was structured was based upon thinking in terms of articulating transferable skills that are in high demand in every industry. Being a lifelong learner is important in every career path. And not just claiming that you have that skill, that's what defines you, but then giving specific examples of what that means here. So here you put the degrees you're working on. There's even a way to link micro-credentials from Adobe here to this area of the portfolio. Here is a second skill. I'm a dynamic communicator. And here's a link to a project that I worked on. Here's an example of me being a creative problem solver. Here's an example of me being a team player and a collaborator. And then in this package, we also have examples of actually completed versions of the portfolio. So here, for instance, is Valentina's version of completing this portfolio. So they can look at the model and see how to get from the sort of empty generic template to customizing it and making it their own. So here is what Valentina's portfolio now looks like once she completes that particular template. And so in this leave behind is what we are seeing as the greatest hits, the most common use cases, the thing folks are most asking for in terms of academic work that is this kind of authentic assessment that's meant to circulate. So research posters. In fact, the research poster template was also sort of co-developed with some folks from your library that we've been working with who do a lot of work with undergraduate research to capture what they're doing and to help students, develop the skills of data visualization and organized thought and doing oral presentations in front of research posters and all those kinds of things. Something that they do a lot in the creative spaces in the library at UTA, and it's a big part of what they're about. And so any way we can flatten that learning curve and make it easy for any student to just open these kinds of things up and go is exactly what we're trying to encourage here. And so this is the state of the art. And right now, these also include videos that give you step-by-step instructions on how to create a research poster, how to choose a template, how to add text, how to arrange your content clearly, how to add tables and graphs. It's all self-contained within this unit here, including links to micro-credentials and badges that can be simultaneously earned, as well as the sample models of a completed version of this. And so what you're looking at here in this leave behind is a web page that collects this library of modules. But it's important for you to also know, especially those of you who teach online, that we are literally 1 week away from sharing with instructional designers on your campus a Canvas shell, a Canvas course that is a library of all of these modules that can then be distributed and plugged into any course anywhere at UTA through Canvas. So you could access these materials through these links, through this website, but in many ways it's more effective to have all of that content delivered straight into your LMS course shell. So this is an example, for instance, of the portfolio that I just showed. There's actually an assignment prompt here that you could edit, or you could use as is for completing this portfolio assignment. There's a link to the template. There's a model of the template being completed. There's the video tutorial that I just showed you. And then there's a relevant Adobe micro-credential or badge that could be simultaneously earned by completing the assignment. And so all of this has been sort of very intentionally packaged to make it easy for anyone to pick this up and start running with it right away. And through the center here, as well as the library, and also through some of the instructional designers, there should be enough support to show any faculty member anywhere across the curriculum, if they're interested in this kind of authentic assessment and high impact practice and work, how they can pick up these modules, pick up these open educational resources and start running with them immediately. This is an example of the micro-credential course for job application essentials that would be appropriate for a student creating a career branding portfolio, and they could simultaneously earn this badge. The idea is that an instructor can pick and choose, what pieces of this they might or might not want as part of their course. They may say, no, I don't imagine I can unpublish that part, or they may say, I want to use my own rubric instead of this generic sort of assignment prompt. The idea is you can turn the pieces on and off and publish and unpublish them. So you can use the entire module as much or as little as you want. You can even take our remixable template and remix it yourself to make it even more customized for a particular course. And so if we come back full circle to where we started, what we're doing here is we're taking the most affordable, scalable, easy to use platform that I know of, which is Adobe Express, and we're making it so that anyone can start doing really powerful things with it immediately that are particularly appropriate for higher education, right? And you can use the link, you can use the resource that's in the chat pod to get to this deck that I created in Express, of course. And then at the end of this deck is the link to the resource that we've just been showing, which is basically a brief library collection of these really, really easy to use and powerful places to begin in your class. And I even had someone yesterday said, what I want to do is I want my students to start in the infographic, and then I want them to put their infographic into a research poster. So these are designed to be very sort of versatile and modular and plug and play, and everyone may have their own mix of what they're interested in. So I'll stop talking there, and I'll just real quickly, for those of you, if everyone would put in the chat pod, based upon what I just showed, what they like, what's first most attractive to them. I'll put the list back up here so you can sort of remember. So here are the sort of six sort of different modules. I'd also like to add to the portfolio one, another one that's about a day away from being published, which is a narrative. So to tell a story in a multimodal way, especially a reflection narrative on a learning experience or on a process that they went through as part of something, that is the next most popular sort of use case that would be here. And so if everyone would just kind of, I'm just kind of interested as a kind of a quick poll, which of these six seems most interesting to the folks in the chat pod, and just take a quick look in the chat pod and see what we have there.
There was a question, Todd, whether students can work collaboratively on these projects in Adobe.
Great question. We'll get to that in just a second, and we'll answer other questions. I'm trying to get to the chat pod. I can't sort of, it's hard for me to share screen and get to the chat pod at the same time. There it is. Infographics, research posters, portfolios. Yes. Shelley says it's great that students can immerse themselves and not just cut and paste posters, right? And so, awesome. So good to hear that. Thanks for saying that. There's a lot of questions to explore here, and one of them is definitely the collaborative question. And so different modalities have different levels and different kinds of collaborative possibility. The presentations are completely collaborative, and one of the most common request is I want students to be able to collaborate on a team presentation. And so in Express, you can invite people to co-edit and co-author most everything that you can create. The web page feature, actually, you can only have one person editing at a time, but the slide deck feature for creating a presentation, you can invite people to edit in real time all the time. So all of these things have some level of collaboration. The web page one is the one that's most limited because only one person can edit at a time. But the presentation decks, someone starts the project and then anyone can collaborate that's invited to collaborate, right? A really, really important question is, what about generative AI here? If I open Adobe Express to students, what access is that going to give them to generative AI? And so I know a lot of faculty are very concerned about that. This is predictably from Adobe is Adobe Firefly is focused on image AI, so generating images. It won't write an essay for you. So that isn't what it does. And the other advantage of this, Adobe being the worldwide leader in digital content creation, it isn't just that you can do text to image. In Express in light and powerful ways, you can also edit, photographs. Like you can remove an object, like there's an airplane here that you just take a brush and you say, get rid of that. Or you can insert an object like, okay, I want these carrots on this plate of food. You can actually generate templates. So I want a template for a slide deck for a mechanical engineering firm. You can generate presentations. Now, it's not going to write the presentation for you, but it's going to put together a visual layout. You can actually even create your own text fonts. So this one probably is something like silver purple balloon font, right? And so what you find is that working here in Express is so much easier than the old ways we used to have to edit and create media. And I'm going to show you something I did a million times in Photoshop. So I click the plus button, I click quick action. I'm going to upload my headshot, and I'm going to remove the background. And I don't know if how many of you out there ever tried to remove a background in Photoshop, but it used to be a very tedious process. So here we go. And don't blink, because in a matter of seconds, it's gonna, oh, I didn't click remove background, sorry. Photo, remove background, here we go. And then in a matter of seconds, after I click on remove background, it's gonna completely eliminate the background. But that's just the beginning, because once I remove the background, then I have full access to edit this in most ways that most of us think about editing something, which, change the contrast, you change the color saturation, all these kinds of things that you used to have to do in Photoshop now can be done in Express. And so, boom, the background's gone. Now I click open in editor, and up is going to come all the sliders and all the things you used to do to edit any photograph in Photoshop. You crop it, you can create layers, you can adjust the color, the hue, the saturation, the brightness. All of those things can be done right here in Express. And this was 2 clicks, 3 clicks the most, right? And so the idea is that this is incredibly powerful, and all of these things are being increasingly enabled by generative AI workflows So if there was something in this picture that I wanted to remove or insert, in fact, let's just do it for fun. I'm going to click Insert Object, and I'm going to put, I don't know, let's put an owl here in the woods. Owl. And if I was a good prompt engineer, I'd say something about the owl, if it's fierce or if it's flying or whatever. But this is very simple. Look how simple this interface is. I click things, and the point here is that because we've been at this longer than anyone, I like the way the owl's kind of pointing at me there. It isn't just that you can, do a text to image. It's that you can do it in naturally integrated ways throughout our workflows in ways that almost no one else can touch. And here's a very important thing to understand when it comes to AI literacy. Our approach to image gen AI, as opposed to pretty much everyone else in the world, is based upon intellectual property that Adobe absolutely is clearly licensed to use. So most AI image models have not been trained that way. Most AI image models scrape the entire internet without any respect for anyone's intellectual property and train their models on that data. And as you can imagine, that wouldn't be what Adobe, as a company whose primary customers are creative professionals and photographers and graphic designers and filmmakers, we're not about to devalue folks' intellectual property. So when it comes to AI literacy, having these kinds of teachable moments where you can have these conversations about things like intellectual property and copyright, as well as opportunities to talk about accessibility, so that in web page, when you import an image, you have the opportunity to put in an alt image tag, and you want to talk to students about why that's a good practice. We also have add-ons for accessibility features, so that here I'm going to bring up this is the deck I've been working on today. And in Express, there are add-ons that can run accessibility checkers on all of this. And so the idea is it isn't just quick and simple and easy ways to get things done in irresponsible or unethical ways. We like to think that in order for students to develop AI literacy, we want to create moments for them to have this kind of discussion. We want to create those teachable moments when you're talking with them about accessibility, when you're talking with them about the way AI models are trained, and so that it isn't just the wholesale either adoption or rejection of these technologies, but it's the critical reflection on them that is enabled by enabling this kind of work. And so to come full circle, here is a transferable skill that we know everyone is increasingly valuing, which is AI literacy. And it isn't just enough to be able to know how to create do an AI prompt and then write a paper or write a report or summarize a lecture or summarize a meeting. It's to be able to ask the critical questions about when is the right time to use which kind of AI application, because they're not all the same, and they have different limitations and affordances, and they have different sort of basic design paradigms behind them that enable certain things but don't enable others. And so in order for students to become those critical users, we need to create teachable moments in any class everywhere across the curriculum for you as a class to ask those questions collectively, so that they're looking at these emerging technologies from different angles as they continue to emerge. And so that's what I have to share so far. I'm going to try to go back to the chat pod and see what other questions might be there. Has anyone seen anything there for specifically? Are the pages and content created and expressed structured in a way that is easy for an AI to ingest? I, 'Cause The pages and the content in web page are designed according to hierarchies of document design to make them accessible. And in them being accessible to a screen reader, that means that any AI bot could also access them. Now, all of Adobe is intended to create very creative expressions. And so, Express isn't so much a document creating uh, platform like Word is, or like even Excel is. Uh, if a bot wanted to go get information there, it's more designed to be a creative expression, but it's also follows the basic rules of hierarchy so that it can have the maximum accessibility for different people. And then when you do that, AI bots are going to be able to access it in a similar way. And I'm not sure if that's exactly the question you're getting at, but that's what I've got. So, any tips for using these creative assignments in 140 plus class, with one TA? Absolutely. And so once you think about what it is you aspire to create, remember that's where we began today, then we can think, okay, do we want to do something quick and easy in a class with 200 people? Do we want to do this out of class? If you want it to be something in class, or a very sort of quick and light assignment, instead of creating a whole portfolio, you might just create a meme, or a snapshot using generative AI. So, for instance, one of the most common things that the folks are doing right now in first year orientation, for instance, is they're having incoming students open up an Express template that has their name and their hometown and their major, and then they use generative AI to fill in an image that they created using Firefly of the future that they're hoping to experience, right? And so that's a quick assignment where basically you just open a template, you change the name, and you generate a quick image that represents one idea or one vision, right? And so when you're talking about the large class, those things can scale from something quick and easy like that would just take a couple minutes to create, to thinking, in a large class, just because it's large doesn't mean you might not want to do something robust, like create a podcast. Instead of having students write in a large anatomy class or a large nursing class, for instance, instead of having them write out a procedure that they might create a poster, an infographic with steps 1 through 5 on how to complete that procedure. Right. And I'll just, for years, I'll give you an example. I taught introduction to film for about 10 years, and that was 200 to 250 students. And the first year I taught that class, students had an option. They could do your conventional research, critical research paper that compared films, or, compared film directors to each other. And that was just, they did actually a good job with it. It was just boring. It just didn't do much. But they had an option to recreate a 2 to 3 minute scene from one of the films on the syllabus. And after we saw like the 20 students out of 200 who did that in the first year, I completely jettisoned the research paper, the critical research paper, and then had every single student, 250 students, partner with someone else in the class, and made an actual film. And the learning they got from that was far better than anything else we did. Because the idea was, you wouldn't really want to understand how movies and film work, try to make one. Try to think about how to create a location, and how to direct people to act, and how to light it, and the costuming, and the way you deliver the lines, and the way you edit the different cuts, and where do you put the camera in, and all of those things. That's how students learned about film more powerfully than ever. And that was just an example of of first experimenting with an innovative approach that proved to be so powerful that it largely replaced almost everything else we did in the class, right? So the idea is now that kind of thing is much easier than ever to do because of these media technologies. Let's see what else we have in the chat pod. One university has over 800 students using Expressify. Oh, there you go. I may have missed it, but what features are built into Adobe Express to assist in verifying or creating accessible content? And so in Adobe Acrobat Pro, which all of you should have as faculty and staff, there are vast accessibility features. We've done extensive research on neurodiversity and readability. There's something called liquid mode in Acrobat in terms of just accessibility to documents. In terms of the sort of visual things that we're really focusing on here in Express, we are constantly working on that, and we're constantly improving on that. And so the latest development are accessibility checker add-ons in Express, so that you can do basic things like color blindness and contrast and all those sort of, when you're looking at visual things that are creating content. And then of course, just having, the standard things such as alt image tags available, as well as being sure that the way things are tagged in the documents have hierarchies that can ultimately be screen readable. And then, as I said earlier, the big idea though is to not shy away from these sometimes challenging things as they're emerging, but ask the question, okay, you just created this beautiful website or this beautiful slide deck or this beautiful infographic. Did you consider to what extent everyone's going to be able to access this, right? And then what are the questions you need to ask, right? As opposed to shying away from it. If first of all, your students all have access to this, if they didn't have access to this, there'd be no opportunity to have those kinds of teachable moments. So, respect for intellectual property, respect for accessibility is a conversation that everyone needs to be having in these times and in these ways of sharing knowledge and developing knowledge. And the best way to do it is in these kinds of contexts where they're trying to actually say something important related to any class. Not to money one here, but can you access with your university user ID Firefly and Podcast too, but using in Express is more comprehensive. Yes, your same ID and your same SSO through UTA should get you into any of the Adobe applications that you have available to you, which should include Firefly, which definitely will include Express. The thing with Express, and maybe I should have started out this way, if you think about Adobe Creative Cloud, it's all of these professional grade applications: Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, After Effects, Premiere Pro, all of them, right? 30 something of them. And if you have a Creative Cloud license, you've got all of that, including Firefly, including Express. But where we are focusing educators and learners increasingly is in Express, because it's so widely accessible and so easily available. There's no limitation if you're in a Chromebook compared to if you have a laptop computer. So I hope I answered that question. We're at the top of the hour.
We are.
Yeah, we are. Sorry, Todd.
Oh, I'll wrap us up. Yeah, we'll follow up with the recap post with all the links. We just encourage everyone to just kind of play around with it, as with everything with pedagogy. So thank you so much, Todd. We appreciate your insights and great to connect virtually. And thanks, Steve, from Adobe as well, for joining us. And we will connect in another context. And thanks to our team here, Beth Fleener, Nikisha Brown, and Sarah Shelton.